News Talk on demand. Interruption-free audio where you want it, when you want it.
I'm John Gormley. Good to have you here. Greetings, welcome, and thank you for checking in wherever we find you on this day. Well, an interesting guy who we have not yet met. We've had Jordan Peterson on many times. Jordan Peterson, the outspoken psychology prof at the U of T, who coincidentally spent every summer as a kid at a lake in northern Saskatchewan. So we caught Jordan on his way back to the lake this summer. He popped in studio. We had a delightful visit. But another guy who even the mention of his name this morning on Twitter had one of our social justice warrior followers, a guy named Jose. So you're going to have Gad Saad on, and this guy's poo-pooing the idea because you wouldn't want somebody to speak publicly, particularly if what they say does not conform with what you believe. Gad Saad was through here a couple of weeks ago, actually, speaking at the U of R, but we missed him at that point. But I really wanted to make a date to spend a little time with him on the show this morning. He is a fascinating guy, and if you've watched any of his work on YouTube, his YouTube channel, he is an academic, first of all, Concordia University, PhD, and a professor of marketing, and consumer behavior is one of his areas of study. He talks about the constraints or limits on free speech, and he argues quite appropriately there should be a couple of them. But beyond that, absolute free speech, for as horrendous and horrible as it might be what some people say, is something that strengthens democracy. And as a corollary to that, he speaks about political correctness and what it's doing to drag down the level of debate at Canadian universities. We find him where he's based at Concordia University in Montreal this morning. Dr. Saad, nice to make your acquaintance finally.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, you were born in Beirut, emigrated from Lebanon. You're Jewish, so you come from the Middle Eastern world of debate and politics. How have you found yourself becoming the free speech advocate that you have in Canada?
Well, I guess I am allergic to moral hypocrisy and violations of the truth. And it is something that I have pursued doggedly in my scientific career. So, for example, in my scientific work, I applied biology and understanding consumer behavior, which is something that is completely contrary to the prevailing orthodoxy. And so I had if you like, a history of ruffling feathers. Now, it started off in my scientific career, but then as my career progressed in academia and I started seeing the atmosphere in universities becoming increasingly more stifled, then I simply couldn't avoid speaking out against this nonsense.
So this nonsense, as you call it, and you've mentioned that it, quote, impedes the free and rational exchange of ideas. How did it come to this, that we don't allow ideas to be even talked about openly?
Well, so I think it's really a cocktail of forces, which incidentally, not to plug my next book, is really the topic of my next book. It's currently tentatively titled Death of the West by 1,000 Cuts. And what I'm referring to here is, postmodernism comes in, becomes fashionable on campuses, and it basically says, well, there are no objective truths. My truth might be just as valid as yours. So it's, if you like, it's relativism on steroids. Then you've got social constructivism, which is a very hopeful message. We're all born with empty brains, empty minds, and it's only socialization that makes us who we end up becoming. Then you have radical feminists who say there are no innate sex differences. You have cultural and moral relativism that says, who are we to judge other cultures? All cultures are inherently equal. And several others. So you take all of these movements, none of which by themselves could have been sufficiently injurious to the truth, but then you put them all together and you have a perfect tsunami of departure from reason, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Professor Gad Saad with us at his base in Montreal at Concordia University. And I would imagine what enables those 5 areas of prevailing thought you've identified to then work is the muzzling of anyone who might question some of those orthodoxies.
Exactly right. I mean, in the same way that totalitarian regimes go after the intellectuals first, right? They don't go after the guys with the big muscles first. They go after the guys with the big brains first, because it's the guys with the big brains who might offer a countering viewpoint that they have to squash. And by the same token, these ideologies. They're really not scientific fields. They're not valid academic viewpoints. The only way they could win into a battle of ideas is if they stifle others. Now, in the Middle East, if you say something that I don't like and I'm the boss, well, I behead you. In the context of the West, well, we can't behead people, but we could do the next best thing, which is ostracize you, threaten you, no longer invite you to the cool parties, threaten your tenure. So there are all sorts of ways by which we can create environments where ideas can't compete with one another, and that's what we're increasingly seeing on campuses.
Now, even in the milieu of that, you essentially are an advocate of virtually absolute free speech with a couple of caveats. What are they?
So number one, you can't directly incite violence against others. So I can say Judaism is absolute garbage and nonsense. Now, that's not anti-Semitic, that's not hate speech. This whole idea of hate speech is nonsensical. But if I say, hey guys, let's go out there, round up all the Jews and kill them, who's with me? Now, that's unacceptable. So that's number one. No direct incitement to violence. And, of course, defamation and libel. I can't say, I know that John has been cheating on his wife nonstop and sort of use my platform to defame you in ways that I absolutely know are incorrect. Short of that, everything is fair game.
Now, that's pretty radical, even among moderate free speech advocates. So, because you get into this idea that, how much can you limit speech and then say you don't like when someone limits your speech? So, I mean, I think morally and consistently, yours is the easier position to defend.
Exactly. And as you might have heard me mention this before, and I'm glad that you said that I'm Jewish, because the next example I'm going to give is relevant to my religious heritage. I support the right of Holocaust deniers to come on campuses and spew their grotesque idiocy. So imagine someone who is Jewish. It is difficult to imagine something more grotesque and more offensive than to reject a historical fact that is as clear as the existence of gravity. Yet in a free society, I have to be able to tolerate the existence of morons, of racists, of idiots, of people who are incorrect. That's the price that I pay if I wish to live in a truly free society. The way that I can get back at them is to battle them in the arena of ideas and demonstrate that they're idiots. But I don't shut them down. I don't make it illegal for them to spew their nonsense.
Dr. Gad Saad with us, marketing professor, Concordia University, and a guy who's been picking up a huge following around the country for his advocacy of free speech. The fact that you go to university campuses, and again, what you're saying is like a breath of fresh air to so many of us, universities have become places that increasingly a lot of us despair. We look at our alma maters, we may have done 1 or 2 degrees or even just spent a couple of years at a university. How are they going to break out of what has become a reputation where political correctness is actually inhibiting not just speech, but the exchange of ideas? How do they do that?
I think that those who hold those totalitarian fascist bents have to become in the minority. They have to be run out of town, metaphorically speaking. So the only way to do that is for the silent majority who actually views their behaviors as grotesque to actually grow a pair, to use a colloquialism, and to actually join the battle for freedom. The problem is that, as you correctly pointed out, there's probably a handful of folks around North America who are in academia who are taking the positions that myself and Jordan Peterson and a few others are taking. So those who are writing to us, and I know that Jordan receives many emails and I receive innumerable emails from professors saying, thank you for your courage, I love what you're doing. Well, I don't need for you to send me a private message, although I appreciate it. I need you to join me in the fight publicly. So if you get enough people to rise up and challenge this fascist idiocy, then we can quickly redress the ship. If we remain only a few of us fighting, we will lose the battle.
Yeah, it's amazing because I know in academics I encounter, we have great discussions, but it's always started and ended with, but don't ever use my name, don't say I said this.
Exactly.
And these people are respected senior academics who just run for cover lest they be outed.
And imagine that these are people who have the full occupational protection of tenure, right? I mean, the whole point of tenure is to provide academics the opportunity to be able to say things that might upset people without the threat of their being fired. So what is it that you're afraid of? I mean, you have courageous bloggers in Bangladesh willing to speak out at the risk of being hacked into pieces, but you can't have a truly privileged Western academic speak out when he or she is protected by tenure? I mean, cowardice is truly a fatal condition of the human spirit.
Dr. Gad Saad with us. How did your speech go at the U of R? See, I get a lot of heat because I always go, and here's the subtitle, the University of Regina, where free speech goes to die. And that's what I always talk about the U of R, and they get quite cross with me. So the U of R does not have a distinguished record in doing anything to promote free speech. So how was your gig there?
It was absolutely wonderful. Not a single person was rude. No one tried to interrupt me. No one said... I mean, in the Q&A period, there were a few people who challenged me, but even in the context of their challenging me, it was done in the right spirit. So I truly have nothing but a very loud kudos to all the people who were involved at the University of Regina. That's
wonderful. Good to hear. So maybe I might have to tone down my position because I'm very hard on. But again, it comes from experience, right? And I've done enough gigs there, book signings and this sort of thing, where I think, oh my God, who's running this place? But
hey, maybe they've been listening to your show and decided to behave more appropriately.
Yeah, who knows? Gad, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope you'll join us again from time to time.
Anytime, would love to. Thank you so much.
Take care. Gad Saad is a marketing prof at the Concordia University in Montreal, and his area, as he talks about, is evolutionary behavioral sciences. So he talks about human evolution, and he writes a great deal on consumer patterns in marketing. And he said when you study what he has done in marketing, that's ruffled a lot of feathers. The fact that we are evolutionarily, our biology, in large part, is going to drive what we consume and how we buy and how we sell. He said that's sometimes pretty dramatic. So he's no stranger to ruffling feathers. What did you think of what he just said? Was this worthy of a social justice warrior getting his knickers in a knot this morning? Did you hear anything that was deeply offensive about Gad Saad? But what about this idea of absolute free speech? Only two exceptions. One, you cannot directly incite violence, and that's appropriate. And two, you can't defame or libel someone. But beyond that, from Holocaust denial to criticism of gays and lesbians and all else, and the Supreme Court of Canada, no less an authority, in the Watcott case, defined hate speech very rigorously. So all of that would be tossed out in Gad Saad's Canada. Join the conversation at 1-877-332-8255. This is 650 CKOM and 980 CJME.